Welcome to the Toxics Reduction via Responsible E-Waste Management video series, presented to you by the Delta Institute with funding from the US EPA Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. In this video, Sarah O'Brien, Director of Outreach and Communications with the Green Electronics Council, creator of the EPEAT registration, brings us the presentation, Reducing E-Waste Through Purchasing Decisions, Opportunities with EPEAT, in 3 parts. This is Part 1. This content was originally created for a workshop series in Toledo and Cleveland, Ohio.
Good morning. I'm going to address purchasing approaches that can help address e-waste management from the front end, and talk a little bit about the EPEAT tool, which can make environmental purchasing of IT equipment easier and more straightforward. So, first of all, why should purchasing be involved in looking at end of life? Why do we address those issues, and how do we address them with purchasing? Almost everything that leaves an organization as waste was purchased. So addressing that front loading of waste issues as you bring materials into the organization is really a critical step. Otherwise, you can have fabulous management techniques and policies and procedures at end of life, but you're going to still just be dealing with an ongoing problem. So putting together a dialogue between waste management and compliance staff and purchasing is really critical. Often those two don't talk to each other at all and have no idea the issues that they are encountering and how they might jointly address them. There are issues like, for IT, refresh rates that are based on depreciation cycle rather than the equipment actually being worn out. There are these kinds of approaches that are just sort of standardized in a purchasing setting and might be better addressed if they were parsed and understood from a waste management and environmental safety point of view. So most contracts, purchase contracts for IT, don't include end-of-life take-back. Lease contracts obviously do, and we'll talk about, that's obviously one way of addressing end-of-life issues. And even when folks are doing end-of-life disposition of electronics, they may cover a lot of legal compliance and security issues, but often not require best management practices. One of the reasons that it's so critical to address the environmental issues related to ICT is that information and communications technologies have the capacity to create incredible environmental benefit by enabling telepresence, telework, e-government, increasing efficiency of things like agriculture, transport, building efficiency, and so forth. So there's this incredible capacity to save immense amounts of energy. For every 1 watt of energy spent through ICT usage, the estimate is that you could save 4 watts of energy. And that's very, very significant. But let's not assume a false trade-off that somehow electronics are therefore benign. There are immense amounts of resource consumption, toxic content, and waste volumes related to electronic products. And as more and more people around the world have access to those products, the more waste there is. So the fewer the products that are purchased, the longer their life, the greener the materials and substances in those pieces of equipment, and the more well-managed throughout their life cycle and at end of life, the greater the resulting benefit from all of the power of information technology. So when we're talking about environmental purchasing, there are a variety of strategies that one can use. So strategic purchasing initiatives can address existing issues within the organization and can address a broad array of environmental endpoints. So you can look at the toxic content of products, reducing that toxic content through specifications, encouraging efficient resource use, buying the most efficient equipment you can in terms of energy consumption during life and resource consumption in production. You can address through reduced or strategic purchasing, reductions in product waste volume and toxicity, and packaging waste. So, purchasing holds the keys to that front door. Has to work with others. Obviously, the IT department is critical because you can't valorize environmental issues above performance issues, and no one would want to. Luckily, there's not really a trade-off there. But you've got to work closely with the IT department, closely with the waste management department, and risk management probably. But purchasing can lay the groundwork for success. So in terms of overall approaches to environmental purchasing, it's really helpful within an organization to develop standardization and information architecture that can allow you to reduce the complexity and number of different types of product you're buying. It's much easier to impose certain requirements on a supplier if you can say, I'm buying a full volume of 3,000 computers, and that means that I want you to meet these 10 specifications for environmental performance. If you're going to a store and buying one at a time, that becomes much, much more difficult, obviously. So considering leasing to maintain asset ownership and management with the manufacturing company or leasing company, that's one way to ensure that your company isn't saddled with a lot of waste that you're not really competent or comfortable addressing. You can use standards and product and service certification programs to address criteria development and verification. And by that, I mean, rather than trying to develop all of the requirements for what has to be in or not in a product, how it has to be treated at end of life, and so forth on your own, you can look for successful schemes that have been used by many, many purchasers out there that are credible and well-founded, and, piggyback on those to increase your own environmental initiatives. So if you're not using a standard that it contains verification or certification, you do need to perform due diligence on your supplier's claims. I mean, you're dealing in the purchasing function with salespeople who are eager to get your business and who may not know anything much about the environmental impact or toxic content or other environmental features of the products that they're selling. My favorite story is when I was working with the state of Massachusetts on a mercury reduction initiative, and suppliers of cleaning products had to sign an affidavit saying this product contains no mercury. And in at least one case, that was stapled to a material safety data sheet which said, caution, product contains mercury. And the irony of those two being stapled together was completely lost on the salesperson, who was like, I've checked the boxes, here are your documents, we're all set. So due diligence is very important. Again, a reason you may want to go with a certification system that does some of that work for you. And finally, it's important to require supplier reporting so that you can enable impact assessment, sustainability reporting, and so forth if you want to measure your success and convey it out to your community. So in terms of managing waste electronics, first of all, it's important to understand that, a free lunch is a really unlikely thing to come across. If folks are coming around to your organization and telling you they'll buy your e-waste or they'll take your e-waste for nothing, that's most likely because they're shipping into the scrap market with very little control, if any, on where that scrap ends up, how it's treated, or anything else. They're running a very low-cost operation, which has very little in the way of data security, worker safety, environmental protections, etc., and that's why that cost is low. Regulatory and health protections do cost money and may even require payment for responsible recycling. Ordinarily, the more that you deal with a end-of-life management, asset management service that provides a multitude of services. Some of those services cost money, some of them make money, and you can balance out often and get a better contractual agreement if you're working with a full service provider. And that means they might, retain the equipment might retain some value either for resale as whole working equipment, resale of components, etc. And that revenue might offset the cost of managing some of the no longer usable components and materials. So, the other thing about these worst management practices is they're very, very ineffective. So we've talked a little bit about how resource intensive the production of IT equipment is. When these materials go into the informal recycling sector, the folks in that sector are pulling out very small components and materials, very little out of those products, and then dumping or burning the residue. So we're not setting up any kind of, closed loop or even, efficient reuse of materials. We're really talking about folks going into, say a laptop to get a tiny, microscopic, practically, portion of gold, which is of value, and dumping the rest of it. It's very, very important to think about, we do get what we pay for. And there are ways to reduce the cost, but there is cost involved in positive, environmentally sound management. So the other reason it's really important to address end of life is to conserve value. Your assets in place represent 70 to 80% of the lifetime CO2 emissions of those products is already consumed. That happens in the production phase through, resource extraction, manufacturing, shipping, etc. So there's a huge amount of resource consumption and energy and CO2 that's already consumed by the time that product is delivered to you. So you don't want to waste that. That should be conserved in use as long as possible to get the most use per resource consumption unit possible. The other thing that is already spent is your costs. Your cost of purchasing that equipment, of setting it up, of training, of managing the other equipment at end of life. So you've sunk a lot of cost into this equipment. Maximizing value is not just for environmental reasons; it's also for your organizational reasons, for efficiency and of operations. So thinking about how active lifecycle management can help you maximize the value of those purchases is very important. So thinking about purchasing equipment that is capable of being upgraded, or equipment like thin clients where the upgrades happen in a central server, and therefore each terminal can stay in use a long time. Optimizing by cascading redeployment throughout your organization. So a product that's no longer good in a highly intensive computing situation can certainly serve as a, just a display screen or something for basic word processing in another setting in your organization. So really thinking about strategically deploying your assets within the organization rather than just using them, dumping them, getting new, regardless of their ability to be used for a longer time. Thinking about donation. Donation obviously doesn't, donation or resale involves some significant issues. You have to look at proper data destruction, and I know we've just talked about that. Have to look at verified working status, so you're not trying to, obviously you're not reselling non-working equipment, but also you're not donating equipment that's so outdated that it simply isn't workable for the recipient. So thinking about keeping that equipment in life even after your organization can no longer make use of it. And considering programs like manufacturer take-back that include resale and donation or third-party asset disposition services that, again, can retain value, can resell, can keep that equipment in life. Leasing or supplier take-back are obviously very effective ways of keeping your organization from having to do the end-of-life management of these products. And that may be, depending on your resources and expertise, that may be the best option for you. Purchasing standards like EPEAT set some constraints and best management practices for suppliers' end-of-life management services. You can also do that if you're purchasing outside of a certification system. You can specify for take-back or lease that you want that asset owner to use an accredited or certified end-of-life processor for recycling. That's a little bit difficult because you don't really control disposition of that equipment, but it is a part of the negotiation that you can work with. Leasing keeps that legal responsibility on the supplier, whether that's a leasing company or an OEM. So that's one way of maintaining this. But again, you don't necessarily have the control through to end of life on that equipment. If you're working with a manufacturer from whom you purchase, many of them, the larger global manufacturers, now offer pretty detailed, very rigorous, full third-party asset disposition services for either leased equipment or, in some cases, purchased equipment. So, considering that, looking at the rules of the road that they impose on their service providers there, the data destruction and other security aspects and so forth is very important, but it may make the most sense to tie that end-of-life disposition in with your upfront purchasing so you know at end of life exactly what you're doing with this and that it is going to go into a system that's certified or audited to a high standard. So if you're going to take advantage of either and take-back and leasing end-of-life take-back, you want to establish that end-of-life pricing and performance terms as part of your purchase and lease price so that you have a reliable total cost of ownership. You don't suddenly run into a vastly inflated price 5 years down the road when you go to dispose of that equipment. So in terms of end-of-life management, purchasers of services, end-of-life services, you need to do due diligence at the time of purchase and to follow up thereafter. You want to set tight performance criteria for best management practices. You can do that by requiring certification or audits of different kinds. We've talked about the R2 and eStewards certifications in the U.S. There are others internationally that contain some very stringent requirements that are audited on a regular basis. You want to get reporting either through your certified handler or direct to you on all changes in the suppliers of services. So, if you've done a due diligence on where stuff is going, how it's being handled, you want your top-line service provider to report back to you if they change a major contractor in that process. So you understand that they've done their own check on that. You may want full asset tracking by tag down to the component level. This is really a liability avoidance and confirmation of final processing of all parts. That's something, again, that you need to decide what you're going to have the capacity to review, understand, and what you really need. You may want those records available to you in case of an issue or problem. You may not need reporting on them. You can think about those dimensions, but you want reporting back by the processor, by the service provider. Use of R2 or eStewards certified recyclers can definitely help assure active oversight, but it's not foolproof. Any audit program, they're not audited every day. Things can change. It's important to maintain a relationship with your service provider and check regularly with them on their practices and suppliers and so forth.